Okay, we ready to go? Hello, everyone. So this afternoon I'm taking over from Luca Tocodi, who is meant to be chairing this session. Luca hasn't turned up. No, he got his plane has been delayed. So this afternoon we're talking about the three discussants are going to present on the issue of environmental and customary framings of land tenure, and we're very lucky we have three people who've been working on this issue for many, many years and have very deep experiences both at the policy level and down into various remote places in Indonesia. So we're going to start off with Chip Fay, who I have the pleasure of knowing for probably, well, we won't mention how long. I met Chip when he was working at the World Agroforestry Centre in Bogor, but before that he was the Ford Foundation representative in Indonesia dealing with natural resource management issues. And most recently he's been working for the Packard Foundation, and just now, just the last couple of years, he's been working for Aman. So Chip is perhaps the best placed person almost I can think of to present the case for Indigenous rights in Indonesia and all the recent legal innovations that Adrian was just talking about. So without further ado, it's a great pleasure to introduce Chip.
Thanks, John. I'm going to use a speaker mic. Is everyone hearing me in the back okay? Good. Yes, this is a great pleasure to have been invited to this gathering. I've been asking John to come here to give a talk for some time now, thinking it'll be 3 or 4 graduate students. I didn't realize he'd be invited to such a prestigious event. And I'll cover a lot of ground in this presentation, so I'll ask you to bear with me too. And, but I really do want to gear this a lot to the students who are here, particularly the Indonesian students, so pay attention. It's going to be on the exam. So I've been asked to talk about formalization of customary rights in Indonesia and the forest estate. I should begin by saying I'm an advisor to the Secretary General of the Indigenous Peoples Alliance in Indonesia. There's actually an SK, so I'm a staff ahli sekjen. So I'm very proud of everything I've done. That's the title I'm most proud of. And I'm going to run through the first 4 fairly quickly, because I do want to get to 5 where we'll have a good discussion with what Adrian has put forward. But I do want to place the discussion in a historical context, discuss what we actually mean by indigenous peoples in Indonesia, the problem with terminology, the advent of the permanent forest estate that Adrian covered, and I'll add some detail to that. Obviously, the resulting conflict that Nancy has mentioned, and then we'll get into some of the changes that Adrian began to talk about, and I'll add a little bit more detail to that, and all of it within the context of a social political movement that Aman, as the National People's Indigenous Alliance, is leading. And there's a lot more than what Aman is doing, but I am here as a representative of Aman, and I will emphasize what Aman is doing, and the support that they're getting from legal analysts and international NGOs, legal analysts in Indonesian and international support agencies and organizations. And then the prospects, what's happening. So Nancy took the privilege of, or the liberty of going back 100 years. I'm going to go back 6,000 years. So you can't talk about masyarakat adat anywhere in insular Southeast Asia without talking about the great migrations that happened. We do know that the early migrations came through, the earliest migrations of humans came through this way. But the great migration of the Austronesian family of languages, peoples, came through here over the last 6,000, 8,000 years, and straight through the Philippines into insular Southeast Asia. And then some of the great nautical achievements of humans have gone all the way out to Polynesia and all the way to Madagascar. Remarkable history of migration. What it means today is that there is a certain commonality, a shared cultural history, particularly linguistic. A lot of this has been done initially through linguistics as well as now genealogy of these peoples throughout Indonesia. There's a commonality of language, culture, and tradition. Although, of course, there's enormous diversity in the settings as well as their religion, as religion came What we have is hunter-gatherer groups and then tribal peoples, as we started talking about in the Philippines 20 years ago, all influenced by trade, organizations around kingdoms, Srivijaya Kingdom, then empires, Srivijaya Empire, and then the great process of colonization that's led to the nation state. Now, all of this happened as these people are migrating and settling into these areas. One of the common themes, of course, is that these people have territories. They're fluid territories, but they've established territories over the last several hundred years and some less. There's a lot of migration, but in general, you can say Masyarakat Adat and indigenous peoples in Indonesia have established territories, and those territories are being mapped now, and I'll get into that later. Terminology is difficult. So unlike Brazil and Latin America, people in the Philippines don't speak Spanish. People in Indonesia don't speak Dutch. I mean, there are Dutch speakers who are still there, and Indonesians who speak fluent Dutch. But as a whole, the colonists went home. Indonesia, in Philippines, it was 300 years of the Dutch, Spanish in the Philippines, 300 years of the Dutch. They went home, and they left tribal societies, indigenous communities here, working among themselves, fighting among themselves, collaborating, the whole rich history of the Insula Southeast Asia. So it makes the indigenous question difficult in international law, and it's a problem in terms of how indigeneity is described in Indonesia versus Brazil and the Americas, the rest of the Americas. Philippines dealt with this by coming up with the term of indigenous cultural communities, and they moved through post-dictatorship into an indigenous peoples law, which is a solid framework for recognition of indigenous territories and being implemented very well up until last year, when they've run into some serious bureaucratic and some political resistance. But more than a third of the Philippines is registered as collective title under the Indigenous Peoples Act. This is where we're moving towards in Indonesia. The term that is most used, both in law and public discourse, is Masyarakat Hukum Adat. So I'll use this term, and you'll see the MHA. And it gets into what Adrian was saying. It's a traditional community that is based on traditional law. And this is an important part of the conversation that I'll get into. So these are the people who've moved through the archipelago. The Orang Rimba came up to Sumatra, and this is Jambi in the 1930s. This is similar to groups I'm familiar with in the Philippines, the hunter-gatherer groups that are still in the forest in the northern Cordillera, parts of Mindoro. The Orang Rimba today have not changed a great deal by their own choice, but they've suffered enormously in the loss of their territory. This is an Orang Rimba community camped out in an oil palm plantation after dislocation, recently taken. And then the Suku Tajang Hitam, there are many community societies throughout Indonesia that are based on deep spiritual, animistic values. In this case, they organize themselves around simplicity and meaning of life. And they're not the majority of indigenous peoples in Indonesia, but they're significant. And these are people who are fighting to protect their territory and manage their area. You can see this is a strong agroforestry system, bamboo-based. And this is in Sulawesi Selatan. And of course, the Dayak are famous for being the majority people in Borneo, both the Malaysian side and Indonesian side, with a lot of sub-communities of Dayak described by Nancy earlier, and what is happening with oil palm mining and forests there. Nusa Tenggara. I just think it's important that we look, as we move east, that these are the peoples we're talking about. In Papua, this is in Waimena. There are many other types of communities, both that are young Adat leaders that are going to college wearing Western attire. All of that is happening, but they're organizing themselves collectively, looking and demanding collective rights. I couldn't come here today without throwing in a slide about fire. The fires are the worst this year since 1997, and it is possible that the fires will equal the impact that we saw in 1997 with the El Nino on the horizon. This is a burn of a smak belukar, a scrub forest for an oil palm plantation overlooked by a local community. The blame game is happening. It's not nice to see, but the more than 97 and more than ever, the details on who is burning, under what concessions, where are the names of the concessions, and legal actions even now are being taken. So in that way, the progress is being made against the perpetrators of fire, at least on the corporate side, far more than ever before. But in terms of prevention, there's been no progress. What I want to go through quickly is that Indonesia is filled with traditional agroforestry systems that are sustainable both in terms of their environmental services as well as the commodities that we see coming out of these communities. This is what we studied at the World Agroforestry Center. A large number of community-based products, cinnamon, the famous ones, pepper, cacao, and these are areas, when we had the economic presentation earlier about where is investment going into agriculture, these systems are invisible to the agricultural community in Indonesia, the Ministry of Agriculture. So just as much as the land rights of collective communities around Adat are invisible, so are the land use systems and the commodities that they're producing for the local rural economy. One of the big pieces of work that needs to be done is a better understanding of the local indigenous agroforestry systems, contribution to local rural economy vis-a-vis the large plantations and the gold mining that Nancy showed. It's an understudied topic, and it's something that is explicit in the 9 points of the Jokowi government, but it's not understood. How do you invest into expanding the production systems of cacao, of rubber, of resins, of nuts, and as well as to measure the environmental services, both in terms of biodiversity, hydrology, of these areas and reward people for the environmental services they're providing. This is, to me, the future of rural Indonesia's economy, is to invest into these types of systems and to protect them. Naturally, it gets back to having a secure land base. These are the famous damar forests of Lampung that I had the privilege of working in the early 2000s. And much of what we're doing in the indigenous Adat community movement and the social movement is to make the invisible visible. And so up until now, the state has tolerated indigenous communities, local communities who are organizing and still organized around traditional forms. And beyond benign tolerance, benign's generous. We'll hear more tomorrow about the conflict, the violence against local people. I'll show us some slides in a minute. But how to make these communities visible, both their rural economies and them as a collective right in order to secure their land base. So here's the famous forest estate. This is one of the largest land grabs in history. So the Ministry of Forestry during the Suharto time, driven by the logging conglomerate, Bob Hassan and all the famous characters, did make a move and classified 70% of the land base as forest zone. They did this by a desk survey, pointing and drawing polygons on a map, and then entering the process of gazettement later, a detailed process of gazettement Adrian talked about. Much of the research that I've been involved in and Aman's been involved in the World Agroforestry Center is to question the whole concept of what this is about. What is this based on? What does it mean? Because the dominant understanding, and certainly the story that the Department of Forestry has told over decades, is this is their area. It is owned by the Department of Forestry. They control the land. Bureau of Lands can't go in there and title, and hands off. And the reason being, they're trying to protect forest functions, right? It's their legal responsibility, administrative responsibility, but it's also in order to the political economy of licensing, both in terms of the big logging boom, and now we see paper and pulp expanding throughout Indonesia. So it's about control over the land in order to issue licenses for the forest industries. What we've pushed for years is to examine the word kawasan. What are we talking about? In English, we talk about forest lands. Read every World Bank report in the 80s, 90s. It's all about the forest lands of Indonesia. Conferences probably here for decades we've talked about forest land. There is nowhere in the English language that translates as forest land. Tanah hutan. Nowhere. In any legal document, any policy I've ever looked at, and I've looked, it's kawasan hutan. So a kawasan is an area. So if you walk into most shopping malls, restaurants, kawasan tanpa rokok. The campus is kawasan tanpa rokok. No smoking area. And in the spatial planning process, you have tourism in the whole south part of Bali. It's kawasan pariwisata. It is zoned. This is a zonation process. This has nothing to do with land. It has never had anything to do with land. It has to do with land use. So land status is determined historically and legally by the Bureau of Lands. Forest functions are the responsibility of the Department of Forestry, now the Department of Forestry, Environment and Forestry. For years we've talked about the duality of land administration. Forestry administers land, BPN administers land. We've had really heated debates among top scholars on this. Forestry does not administer land. They administer forest use. They administer forest functions. BPN has always had the authority to title land inside the kawasan hutan. There is one PP, Peraturan Pemerintah, middle-level law, that says that certain activities of the Bureau of Lands are not allowed in the forestry. So there's one pasal, one piece. 5 minutes. So this gets to the heart of what we're dealing with in Indonesia today, is the relationship between the Department of Environment and Forestry and the Agrarian Ministry and Spatial Planning. This is the violence that has resulted from the advent of the permanent forest estate. This is outside the permanent forest estate on oil palm. This is a recent published report, extensive report from the National Human Rights Commission on violations of human rights inside the forest estate, based on 30,000 villages inside the forest estate. This is being presented to the President now with an action plan of dealing with it. Message being the Department of Environment and Forestry has never been under more pressure in terms of dealing with people inside the forest estate. The story of social mobilization is impressive. This is the beginning of Aman in 1999. Mama Letta is a Goldman Award winner from Flores as one of the board members of the National Commission. Aman has grown enormously since 1999, up to over 2,000 members throughout the archipelago. Good, strong structural organization with 21 organizers in 7 regions with 108 local organizers. And a lot of it is about the mapping of indigenous lands. This is an indicative map of potential adat areas for recognition. This is a difficult methodology to develop, but it's a high, low, medium probability for the recognition. This is all about communicating the story internationally and nationally, but this was presented in New York at the climate meetings. And talking about, this is a probability analysis. I'm not comfortable with the methodology, I won't get into it, but I'll just show you that this is being done, the high probability being 42 million hectares. Adat regions are, the Aman is smart enough to start to look into carbon stocks in Adat areas and the importance of traditional management. All part of the mapping of indigenous lands. Very advanced, huge progress being made, sophisticated maps in, this is mostly Papua, throughout the archipelago, to the point where we are up to almost 7 million hectares have been mapped as Adat traditional lands. These were turned over to the national government, to the Land Agency and to the Climate Red Agency. Officially, it's the only time, first time it's done, where the government has accepted the maps, managing the database, how to recognize these formally. This is where it comes in. So it's legal policy progress. We've talked about the Constitutional Court decision. We've understood this. Adrian explained it quite well. So we had an obvious contradiction where Adat forests were placed under state forests where there are no rights encumbered. clear legal contradiction. This was sorted out by a major constitutional court decision. And that was the, thanks. So this goes back to the role that Adrian was describing about of the Constitutional Court. Really powerful in the last 5 or 6 years. And this was the major breakthrough in the most recent decision in May 16, 2013. And it all comes out in this slide. We have the old stories. Many of you who have worked in the forest in Indonesia know these old signs where you have half a 500 million rupiah fine for being in the forest, and this is the sign by the local community saying this is our forest according to the Constitutional Court. These are the regulations that Adrian was describing. We can get into this in the discussion. This is the coordinating regulation between the pertinent agencies on dealing with land inside the forest estate. This is the most important one on procedures for finalizing the recognition of communal rights. And this is what I'd emphasize is this began with the communal rights of Adat communities as it was being drafted, and other communities were added, which I didn't disagree with, others disagreed with. This is a Home Affairs Ministry that a decree that identifies and recognizes Adat communities as a people, not yet as their land. We need another law that's on the collective title, Hak Komunal, that'll take care of that. This is the draft law that we'd like to see passed in the next session in 2016. This is happening locally. This came out the other day. It was just on WhatsApp. You got it. Thank God for WhatsApp. Otherwise, I wouldn't have this. This just came out 2 days ago. This is a discussion at the local level. This is happening across Indonesia at the district level at the local parliament. So to finalize, we have 3 areas that we have to get straight and are getting all mixed up in these regulations, and partly what Adrian was saying. We have recognition that has to be done of the communities. Their rights have to be guaranteed, kepastian hak. And then they have to be protected. The protection is from third-party threats, particularly from plantations. The political momentum is strong. The Aman community has a strong relationship with the president. This is last month, a meeting detailing the drafting of a special working group that will lead to trying to sort out these various threads of possibility of recognition of both Adat communities, the protection of their rights, and it's being led really by the Minister of Forestry here, Ibu Siti Nurbaya. And that's it. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Chip. Now we have Suraya Afiff from the University of Indonesia Department of Anthropology, and formerly a student of Nancy at Berkeley. So please. Suraya.
First, I would like to thank the organizer for having me here. It is the first time I participate in the update, and also first time I think I attend conference in Australia. So what I'm going to talk actually the environmental rationale and the land management, which is give a context of what has been actually presented by Chip Fay in one aspect of his presentations. So I start with I call the limitation of the recent argument or recent debate or the green grabs argument, which is assume, actually talk about the large scale investment, corporation, and marginalized local people for the environmental purpose, for biofuel, and including for the project reducing greenhouse gas emission in forested sectors. So instead, I just want to open the debate is actually about looking beyond the land grab argument, is looking at the other possibility that environmental agenda used by the actors for other political agenda, which is one of them is the Adat movement, and the effect of that in beyond the effect of the whether there is emission will be reduced or not. That is my my purpose of this talk. So I would like to divide my talk into three aspects. First, I talk a little bit about the context, how this emergence environmental policy inside Indonesia, and then second, in how this civil society agenda groups is actually using this environmental discourse to push other political agenda in terms of the forest tenure reform. And that's how it played out a little bit in discuss about it in Central Kalimantan. So I see the three waves, in my opinion, of environmental policy narratives in Indonesia. So the first, and it's actually during the colonial time, its main policy narrative is species protection, which is then end up it's set aside couple area for nature reserve. And the second one is during the Orde Baru, the new order, which is increase a lot of conservation area and protected forests. Now, my focus is on the third wave, which is started in 2007 when the climate change debate actually held a meeting in Bali. And then the context is that the president, SBY, that actually will give a statement in the one meeting that he will actually reduce emission, greenhouse emission in Indonesia, with or without the international support. And this create enthusiastic donor to pour money to Indonesia. And one of these donor, is important donor, is Norway. What is the difference of Norway with other donor is that the agreement actually pushed for a new form of institution in Indonesia that dealing with reducing emission from the forest sector. So this institution is National RED Task Force, and then become the RED Agency. However, in 2014, the Jokowi's government actually abolished the RED Agency and then moved to the Ministry of Forest, Environmental and Forestry. Now, I want to talk about two important policy. First is the moratorium, which is forest moratorium. What is the forest moratorium policy? It's actually suspensions of new license in certain area of this so-called state forest area. Especially, it's for plantations and mining. So that's why basically the group who against this policy is the oil palm companies, because of the land, especially peatland, become more and more available for, or targeting for plantations. Well, because of this debate, it's, the presidents, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, reluctant to give more moratorium to much larger area, which is the secondary forest, what is called secondary forest, basically overlooked area. So at the end, it's actually only 22% of the new area that targeted by the moratorium, which is peatland area. 78% basically is conservation and protected forest, which makes moratorium with under criticism by the a lot of the advocacy group. But despite of this, there is some interesting effect that come out from the moratorium. Although this is, I said, a limiting factor of the moratorium policy, which is not really affected a lot of area. But at least recent evaluation analyze actually 1.3 million of area in Indonesia is actually that concession cannot put the operation in in this area. Although this is, not in the area which is the lot of the peatland area, which is Kalimantan and Sumatra. Now, the second one, the national policy that actually emerged from this donor project, actually collaboration with the government of Indonesia, is the one map policy, which is, what is the one map policy? I mean, I think in previous speakers, it talked about that every sector in Indonesia has their own maps, and this is create actually confuse and mix problem, a lot of problem in Indonesia in terms of overlapping license. So one map policy is actually to bring all this map. It's only one map that can be used, and it's only one agency that will integrate all this map, and hopefully that all the license and permits will be integrated in this one map. Well, it's how it's affect the integration successful, how it is successful or not, is actually still have to look for how it's affect in the future. But this has some potential in resolving coordination in the future. The work of the one map is actually well successful in terms of integration, all this, a lot of planning in terms of allocation of land, if also combined with the recent work with the civil society also involved with the corruption agency, KPK, in targeting corruption in governments official that give license to the corporation to the area that's supposed not to be exploited. The other effect, which is also important, is the transparency. A lot of this, now a lot of this government information that's usually secret now begun to open during this policy or this project. Yeah? So maps is actually now able to download, and more civil society group get a lot of maps in the how much area in the state forest area allocated for whom, for how long, and things like that. So this is one of the result of the effect of this new global policy on REDD. Now I would like to skip text next to the next level, which is how the civil society use this opportunity to push their political agenda. So I will talk at least two important turning points. First is this project, the donor project, is not only give money to the government, but also give money to civil society, which the civil society then help to use this money to actually bring this issue to the government level, to the national level. So one of the important meeting is actually in the Lombok 2011, where for the first time in history that the Ministry of Forestry acknowledged thousands or even millions of people, it's inside the forest area. And this is important. This is the first time in history he said at least 33,000 villages, found inside and surrounding the forest area. And this is a statement endorsed by the REG agency, that task force. And this situation is create the opportunity for the civil society group to actually push more reform inside the Ministry of Forestry. And in fact, there is a coalition, the task force inside the Ministry of Forestry form for looking or discussing about the tenure reform in the forestry sector. The second turning point is what actually Chip already mentioned, is about the Constitutional Court. And what is important for me is that how the RED task force is actually endorsing this alliance of indigenous people movement, and how the coalition, inside the both collaboration, it's actually increased the more possibility to more reform in the land issue, land tenure inside the state forest. Now, how it play out in Central Kalimantan. So the Central Kalimantan is important, at least one of the province in Indonesia that under the Norway-Indonesian agreement that should be under the national, RED province test implementation province. And it starts with the coalition or joint agreement between the National Task Force and the governor of Central Kalimantan. And this work in Central Kalimantan cannot be done without support of a lot of local and national NGOs. They are also get support from the Norway, from the other door. And because of these coalitions, there's a lot of things that actually push a lot of policy, a lot of work have been done that implicated a land management in Indonesia. Review all the permits. There is a sustainable oil palms regulation that has been passed, regulation on sustainable mining, and a moratorium plantation and mining permits in the 8 kabupaten by the governor of Central Kalimantan. Now, of course, the challenge is that the biggest challenge is during the decentralization era, a lot of this district government was already giving permits to the concession, and you can see a lot of plantation, oil palm plantation, not mention mining. This is just oil palm that already have permits in this area, and during that decentralization era, a lot of this concession is actually not, cannot be, a lot is secret. Yeah, how much land is already allocation for whom? This is untransparent process. Even the provincial or central government cannot actually get all this information. Now, only until under the RED implementation project, all these legal permits, it's become a reveal. How much actually land was given to whom? And the analysis or the review of whether this is legal or illegal has been done through the process of collaboration with the anti-corruption agency, and then this is the result of this about 300 plantations. Only 84 what they call clean and clear. What it means clear and clear is actually legal from the state regulation, which is the Ministry of Forestry. And this is create another problem. How about the other non-illegal permits? Yeah, well, this is still undergo the program to deal with this illegal of oil palm permits. The other one is also interesting is how under this project is actually, it is the RED agency who actually helped Aman to have other community mapping. And this is a task for making more mappings. This is before the abolition of the RED agency. Yeah? So you can see how the environmental agendas actually lead to another issue or another project, which is actually the reform of state forests tenure. And between these 4 years, the civil society group, through the help of the International Fund, under the RED program, actually already put mapping at least 1.4 hectare community participant mapping. This is only Central Kalimantan, not mentioned in other places. Million hectares. Sorry, million hectares. So what I just want to conclude this presentation by saying that global and national environmental policy narrative related to reducing emission from the forest sector has served some purpose of advocacy for advocacy group to push forest tenure reform in the government agenda. And now the Jokowi government, because of this previous work, now the Jokowi government, they argue they are able to lobby the Jokowi government to put the agenda to the target of at least 12.7 million hectares back to the allocated to the local and indigenous people communities. In some degree, this narrative open or increased transparency of informations related to land allocation and land permits, which is, actually lead to another issue on that mentioned by actually Adrian, about the change on land law. It's part of that is to this, environmental, under the environmental banner. So it is actually what is the effect of this global environmental narrative under the Jokowi? I think it's still early to make a conclusion, because the RED agency has been abolished, and the Ministry of Environment and Forestry now has been merged into the one ministry. But what is also not clearly visible to the outsider, it's actually, right now, the advocacy group has been able to some degree to continue to push this agenda inside the Ministry of Forestry itself, now in Ministry of Environment and Forestry, to actually meet the target of the at least 12.7 million hectares. So I think this is, for some of us, is very exciting to see whether this will be materialized. But what I'm saying is that, I'm just want to stress again that we have to look beyond what this effect beyond of the, RED as success or failure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Suraya. Finally, we have Kathryn Robinson, who is the professor in anthropology here at the Australian National University in the School of Asia and the Pacific. So please, you all know Kathy, I think.
Okay, so I'll try and be very quick. Yes, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about this issue of mining and community rights, and if possible, I'll use Nancy's stool, that's very handy. Link up to some of the issues that have already been raised about land rights. And I suppose I'm going to be talking about research that I've been doing mainly in the community of Suraya in the northern part of the province of South Sulawesi, where I've been doing research since the 1970s, when the mining project I'm going to be speaking about was very new. But I guess one of the questions I've been interested in, and I think it relates to this broad theme of seeking the people's sovereignty, is what differences have reformasi and the political changes of reformasi, including decentralisation, what difference have these processes meant for the land rights of these people? That's been a very critical issue in determining their fate with this mining development. Now, as we know, Indonesia has these amazing and immense mineral reserves, including of tin, nickel, gold, copper, coal, in addition to oil and gas. And under the sort of nationalist rhetoric of the Sukarnoist regime, you know, these really weren't open to foreign investment. But one of the first acts of the Suharto regime was to pass the foreign investment law, but also the mining law in number 11 in 1967, which was to open up these resources to foreign investment in the name of pembangunan, or development. And under the contracts of work that were signed with the foreign mining companies, the first generation was Freeport. The one in Sorowako that was signed with with International Nickel of Canada was the so-called second generation of contracts. And the main point I want to make here is that this contract made absolutely made no provision for the protection of local people's rights or for the environment. Oh, hang on, I'm going the wrong way. Oh. So the people of Sorowako, I think picking up on something that Chip said, have been in this part of the island for a very long time. And in fact, there's archaeological evidence that from the 15th century, they were in fact master smelters of iron ore, and the so-called Besi Luwu, or Luwu iron ore, which you find in the Pamor Kris in Java, according to Tony Reid, originated from this part of Sulawesi. But what happened was that the contract of work was signed, the military came in to assist the early exploration teams, they completely took over the environment. The government had at that point completely vacated itself from any role in spatial planning. And so the company was really free to do whatever it liked. And so they, oh, this is just a map, sorry, it's slightly out of order, but we're talking about this lakes area that you can see. It probably looks to you like it's in Sulawesi Tenggara or Sulawesi Tengah, but in fact Danau Matano, or Danau Matana as it is on this map, is right in that border region between those three provinces. So this is the current state of the mining concession, the land that was made available to International Nickel, which was bought out by Vale of Brazil in 2007. This is the current state of the mining concession, but under the 2009 law that I'll talk about in a little bit in a moment, they were forced to relinquish some of their territories. But you can see there's quite a significant amount of domination of land in what's now the district of Luwu Timor, which is in that area closest to that white line, which is the border between Sulawesi, Selatan, Tengah and Tenggara. So this is just some Google Maps images, and you can probably see there, it's just got a little, oh it does have, you can see there this little tiny densely populated area on the edge of the lake. That's the area of the original village. At first the desire was to completely move these people and leave this space available to the company, but they refused to move from their village, and what it meant was that they lost all of their agricultural lands, which is all this land which is now the site of the company suburbs, and as you'll see in a little moment, the golf course. This is just a map that gives you a better idea. So you've got the original population and the own account migrants who became squashed into this little tiny area, and these are the more spacious suburbs that were developed. And when I went back there in 1999, just after Reformasi, I wrote an article for Inside Indonesia, which one of the people reminded me of a couple of months ago when I was back there. And I made the comment, you know, what's changed? You go to this place and the bitumen road stops at the border of the village. So they're all nicely bitumen roads, but the roads that are connecting these little streets within what's called the village Desa Nikal and Desa Sorowako, at that point were dirt. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the effects of Reformasi, but the whole climate of Reformasi, I think, gave people a much greater consciousness of the ways that they were being treated or mistreated, but also it gave them a lot of confidence to stand up much more for their rights. because their previous experience was that they were forced to relinquish their land. Their sawa, their wet rice fields were taken. The fields where they harvested hard crops were, and also the areas where they had slash and burn fields, which were now in the mining area, were taken away. There was no space left for population growth between the original households. But of course their agricultural lands were taken not because they contained nickeliferous ores, but because the company decided that they wanted them for their town site, even though their town planner had recommended to them that they should build the town site somewhere else. But they loved the beautiful views and the amenity of Lake Metano, just as the people of Sorowako do. So the local response was pressing their claims through the expression of Indigenous identity. And they have, since that time, always referred to themselves as the Orang Asli, or the original people of Sorowako. I just put these kinds of signs are the, things that indicate, the way that they're being locked out of these lands, which used to be their agricultural lands. I'll talk a little bit more about them getting limited access to some of these lands in a moment. But this initial period was characterised by quite awful human rights abuses. So there was no negotiation with the local people, and the first time that they knew there was any trouble was when their irrigation channels to the Sawa were destroyed by the people constructing the roads up to the mining, the exploration areas for mining. Now this is a picture of a man called Andi Basso, who's a local leader, someone who's descended from both the local kind of leading families and noble families from the Kerajaan Luwu. And the photograph that he's holding there, I don't know, you probably can't see it very well, but that's a photograph of himself, his father, his uncle, and a couple of his cousins when they were in jail in Palopo. They went to have a conversation in 1972 about the fact that they hadn't been able to cultivate their crops for 2 years because of the broken saluran air. And they were told, well, in fact, we want everything. We want you to move. And when they began to protest, they were actually locked up in Palopo. And the assumption was that once these people were locked up, that that any kind of resistance would fail, and people would accept the land. And I came along about maybe 5 years after this, and people told me really awful stories about having guns put to their head and being told, you take the money, etc. And of the 200 and something plus people who'd been deemed to be the landholders, these were kind of heads of farming households, all but 60 took the land under took the money under these circumstances, but some of them held out. And what this man's got, he's now kind of in his late 60s, and he's built himself this little shed on his fish farm down by the edge of the lake. And what he's put around the walls are the stories of his struggles, which include, for example, his adventures with Anto, who wasn't able to make it today, but the adventures they had in going to Canada at the invitation of Mining Watch, and doing things like talking to shareholder meetings and so on. And all of this was happening around the time just after Reformasi, when there was a decided change in the political climate and the way they felt they could express their claims. Oh, now I'm going backwards. Now the poor spatial planning, I just put in this photo that I took just when I was there a few months ago, but you can see the way that houses are crowded willy-nilly into that little village area that I pointed out before, that it's hard up on a mining area, and there's a lot of this temporary accommodation that people are building along the edge of the lake, especially people who've come from other settlements around Lake Metano. So, as I said, this strong sense of injustice at losing everything gave rise to claims of special treatment on the basis of their status as the Indigenous people of the area. And I mean, listening to Chip's presentation and about that particular definition of Masyarakat Hukum Adat, I think in a kind of a spectrum about how you might think about how these claims are expressed, I think they're probably articulating something which is very close to that idea that you get in the Papua New Guinea Constitution of the people who were the landholders. Like, they saw themselves as having these rights because they owned the land, and because they'd lost that land, because it was taken away from them, they felt that as a group they had rights to have special privileges, like special. Are you giving me a little? No, not yet. That first of all, they felt that, you know, having lost their livelihood by the company taking away all of their agricultural land, then the company had an obligation to provide them with employment. But they also felt that they had the rights to get access, as the Indigenous people of that area, to services like education and health. And if you think about it, at this time, this is all Pemekaran, and the capital, the district capital that they related to was actually Palopo, which is way over on the other side of the Gulf of Bonnet, and pretty inaccessible. When I first went there, the way you got from Palopo to Malili, unless Inco gave you a lift in their aeroplane, which they did for me, which was very nice, you actually had to catch a rather dodgy boat from Palopo to Malili, and then go up an almost, and also pretty dodgy, pretty rough, at that time, mining road. So this is the way that they've kind of situated themselves in relation to the mine. It was really this development which very strongly brought out this expression of themselves as the Indigenous people of the area. And in terms of things like, say, the PS7 criteria of the IFC and so on, they tick a lot of the boxes. They speak a distinctive language, they have a strong sense of self-identity, they have long historical links to this place, and, you know, and the archaeological evidence, for example, you know, shows their ancestors there back at least as far as the 15th century smelting iron. But of course, after the boom days of the construction period, when there were around 10,000 people employed to build the mine, the smelter, the port, then the pipeline for the hydroelectric plant, etc. Once the construction phase was finished, the truth hit home, and these poorly educated people who'd only recently come back from their refugee sites to which they'd been taken during the Dar al-Islam rebellion, where you know, there was enormous suffering, that they were very poorly educated and not the kinds of people who were readily going to get jobs in the mining company. So they were doing it really tough. Now, from the late 70s, early 1980s, some of the land within the mine concession was kind of lent back to them to use for agricultural purposes. And especially since 2000, again after Reformasi, there's been an increasing kind of infill, if you like, of the little interstices between the golf course, the company suburbs, and so on, that are lent out to the people for cultivation. And some of it has involved people going back to reclaim their sawa. This is a very much a personalised and marked kind of landscape, not only in terms of the traces of ancestral graves and so on, but when people walk through the golf course or the company suburb, there's still a kind of a recognition and a claim in terms of the trees that their ancestors planted in their fields. And you know, so this is a kind of a landscape that's full of history and meaning for them. And I'm just showing you a few pictures that I just took this year of some of these elderly people who are the ones who continue to depend a lot on farming for their income. This is a farm. I thought you'd like these photos. I thought especially Pat Ross would like these photographs. This is the sawa that's been infilled in between the greens of the golf course. You can see here the green, and then the manager of the golf course is a local man who's very kind in helping them get access to the water that, of course, we know golf courses need lots of. Here's a lady contemplating things. We were walking across the golf fields, the golf course, to her fields early in the morning, and here's somebody harvesting. Oh, that's the same one, isn't it? Oh, which way does it? Oh, yeah. This is another area that they've infilled. You can see the mine in the background, but this is an area that's in between one of the company suburbs, which is built in their former agricultural lands, and the lake. And again, the family that customarily farmed this land have borrowed it back again. Now, the people who farm near the golf course have to sign a contract. They will have to sign contracts to say they'll get off this land again if the company decides it needs it, because it's still technically within the company's concession area. And the people in the golf course also have to sign an undertaking that if someone gets hit by a golf ball, they're not going to sue. This is a new area that's developed, which just to give you the same sense of the way that you've got the mine sort of, which is very land extensive, kind of dominating this area. This is a new area of housing as part of these ongoing negotiations about compensation. One of the things that happened again after Reformasi was that the company agreed to release some of this land from their concession to be distributed as housing land to these people who consider themselves the Indigenous people of the area, because one of their huge concerns is that, as you see in that constrained space, that as their children grow, get married, have families, there's nowhere for them to go. Now, just to really quickly run through the rest, what's happened post-Reformasi? Well, one of the important things is that more of the money that's generated by this project comes into the local government rather than going to the centre. And for those of you who don't read Indonesian, that big figure is the amount of the gross domestic product of the district that's coming from mining. So you can see it's a really important source of revenue. And this is all post-Reformasi. The new mining law, which I sort of haven't, somehow or other I haven't quite got to that, but the new mining law that was passed in 2009 obliged companies like this one to transform their contract of work into a licence or an EOP, and this has much stricter conditions in regard to reforestation. One of the things I wanted to talk about, but I'm obviously not going to get to talk about, is the anxiety that these people feel about mine closure, because you can see that the company dominates the economy, it dominates the environment. There's very little opportunity for people to develop any other kind of economic activity which isn't dependent on the mining, which leaves the question, what happens if they go away? Now, one of the new law is one issue of mine closure that it does touch on is reforestation. And this company is doing quite well in that regard. This is a reforested area which is right up in the middle of the mining area, and you know that they are doing quite amazing work. I just thought I'd put this in because I knew you'd love this. Another thing that's happened since Reformasi is that the mining company used to be a completely closed place for the women, except as secretaries and nurses and etc. Now the women are operators, and they love it. They think it's fantastic. They get up there in those big trucks and all this kind of thing. There's also a lot of skills training which involve the young women. But as I said, there is this concern about mine closure and about what they're going to do. And so people have been trying to infill with these agricultural enterprises. So, for example, this man's got this extensive pepper garden which is between one of the suburbs and the mine. But just to slip in a little bit more about what's happened post-Reformasi, I wanted to show you some pictures I took down the road in Bombana, where you've got more like the kind of mining that we saw in Kalimantan. Oh, sorry, they're all mixed up, sorry. Oh, sorry, another effect of the 2009 law was that the mining companies were not allowed to export ore after January last year unless they actually had smelters. One of the impacts that this has had is that all through southeast Sulawesi in particular, you've got these abandoned mine sites, and also I read in the Kendari Post 20-something abandoned harbours. But I was going to talk about identity politics, but I haven't got time to do that, so nanti lain kali. So thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks to our three speakers. So maybe we group a few questions. We'll start with Budi, and we'll maybe come back, and then Craig, and then someone over here. Okay, Jeff right up the top there. So.
Budi Rusa Sudarmo, ANU. I understand that there is a need to transfer and redistribute land tenure from the state to local people. But my question is that why we have to do it through adat? Because bringing up adat again also bring other issues like inequality within society, role of women, and so on. And certainly there are other ways to do this transfer and redistribute this property right. An example, for example, now we have village law, which is talk also the property right of land within a village. So that's it.
Hi, Craig Thorburn from Monash University. Just an addendum to Pak Budi's question. This is also for Pak Chip. I'm just wondering, after the revolution, does Amman actually have a policy or a stance about the land use rights of non-indigenous peoples within kawasan masyarakat hukum adat? Thanks.
Yep. I'm Jeff Nilsson from the University of Sydney. I've also got a question for Chip. I noticed in your presentation there, you sort of, not sure it was deliberate or not, but you sort of presented some of the more emblematic indigenous peoples, the Kajang and the Orang Rimba, who are communities that have not only maintained their laws, but have also quite actively resisted modernisation. So I guess I was wondering if you could respond a bit to Adrian's scepticism earlier about adat, and particularly the ability to incorporate adat within more modern state-based law legal structures.
Okay, so next one for you, Chip.
Thanks. I think it's curious to see kind of a backlash that against or concerns against the recognition of collective rights of people who organize themselves around their culture, economy in collective ways. And they self-identify in accordance with international law as indigenous peoples, translated in Indonesia as masyarakat hukum adat. There's concern that others, if they get rights, others will be disenfranchised. It's a curious thing to me. It's the indigenous adat communities in Indonesia have been historically and in numbers the most disenfranchised people across the archipelago. And so we're concerned about enfranchising people who might disenfranchise others, and I think we're getting ahead of the game. Anyone can identify as masyarakat hukum adat in Indonesia, and fair enough, I did show kind of the emblematic and images, but I did want to put people up there. It was just something I felt strongly about. And I'm also curious and confused by the concern of inequity within adat communities, because there's inequity within all communities. Certainly there are issues of the role of women in religion, not in the outside of adat. There's the role of inequity in terms of social stratification in all cultures. And to kind of look at an adat community as having more problematic social issues around these critical questions, it doesn't make sense to me. So it doesn't add up in my mind, the concern of why recognize these communities and provide collective rights. One of the things that I think this is a result of this is that these communities are now becoming very well organized, more than others, with the exception of the Serikat Tani, the farmer organizations that do not claim collective rights, although many are interested now in this new agrarian spatial planning decree number 9 that can give cooperatives and other local communities collective rights through the hak komunal. But those organizations are well advanced, and they're not yet in conflict with the Adat movement. The agrarian movement and the Adat movement are communicating well together. On the ground, there are problems. In terms of Adrian's skepticism, I don't understand it, frankly. I think there's a lot of attention that has been given to Adat communities because they've worked very hard at getting that attention. They're in the press, they're meeting with the president, they're well organized, it's a social movement, and that I, in working in the Philippines and here, have never seen a non-Adat person, community, family in a recognized area evicted from that area. So the question that Greg mentioned of how do you deal with these difficult recognition and inclusion issues can be worked out on the ground, and they have been traditionally worked out well in the Philippines and certainly Latin America. There's tension in the Amazon that is clear. That's an exception. So these are questions that I think are legitimate, but when I've posed these questions in communities, they will say, we will talk about it. When the time comes, we will talk about it. And that is traditionally among these communities, that's the way it's done. We will figure it out. We'll have a mushuara, we'll talk to these people, but the risk of having mass evictions, I think, is low. I'll leave it at that. Kathy wants to make thanks for the questions.
That gives me the chance to say what I wanted to say about identity politics, which is that what I was going to mention was that one of the issues that's happened post-Reformasi is that, of course, the people of Sorowako weren't the only people displaced by the Darul Islam rebellion, that this place was a kind of a checkerboard of Muslims and Christians, and there were Christian populations that were quite brutally forced to Masuk Islam and who managed to kind of run away in the late 1960s. Now, some of these people also decided to come back after Reformasi, and their case has been taken up as a case of Indigenous people. And it does kind of worry me that that's the only idiom that's available for them to express who they are, because if you look at their history, they were brought down from the mountains by the Dutch and settled in this area after they'd converted to Christianity, but they're intermarried and have kinship links with the people of Sorowako. But the people of Sorowako are Muslims. You know, they were already becoming Muslim and were very deeply Islamicized, if you like, by the Darul Islam. And I had those pictures up there that showed these people. They're called the Karong Sie, or the Bumi, the people of Bumpa, or the Dongi. And I've actually seen stuff that's been posted on the internet where they kind of get dressed up in funny kerchiefs, which are not like anything that anybody ever, you know, if you look at the old photos, you know, the kind of head covering people wore there was completely different, and they've got sort of fake spears and swords, and it just really worries me because these are really tragic people. And the real basis of the story of their dispossession is that they were victims of the Darul Islam rebellion. And that's not even, you know, people talk about the victims of 65, the victims of this, the victims of that, but that is not available as a discourse to press your claims. And so they're pressing their claims into this thing of themselves as the Masyarakat Adat, and the groups that are supporting them. It's actually got the place to be a kind of a pemicu conflict if people weren't actually decent and honourable about it, because they're Christian. The other people who aren't being like Aman, don't really recognise or support the rights of the people of Sorowako, who are Muslims and who are now kind of middle class, some of them middle class and educated. So that's one thing that I think is worrying, you know, that it's such a dominant, it's a good brand, you know, it's a good brand, and it's been a terrific brand, and I think it was a really important brand, especially the sorts of things that I was describing that were very common under the Suharto regime. But it just sort of worries me if it's an idiom that drowns out every other idiom, like victims of Darul Islam, of which I'm sure there are very many who are not, you know, not being given a chance to have compensatable claims.
Okay. I know it's... should we have one more round?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, we have one more, since it's a very interesting topic, we have one more round of questions and then we have our coffee break. So maybe I'll start over this side. Okay, one here and two, and anyone, a third one? No? Okay, Jamie, okay, so please, over here first.
Hi, my name is Willem van der Muur from Leiden University. I have another question to Mr. Fay, or to any of the speakers actually, because there's a lot of discussion about this Adat thing, whether you're pro or anti-Adat. But the reality at this moment is that the legal recognition of Adat has to go through the district government. So it's basically a decentralized system. And from what I see in practice is that those communities with close ties to the government, or who the leaders are part of the government, tend to be most successful in getting recognition. For instance, the Kajang community of which you showed us a picture, one of their prominent leaders is actually running for Bupati in the next elections, and the chance that the Kajang community will be recognized is very high, while many other communities in the same area are having a lot of trouble, and indeed, in lack of different discourses available, also claim this Adat status, but to much less, but they're much less successful. Also because of they're weak, they don't have these strong connections to the district government. My question is, what is your view on this?
Okay, I'm Dalik from Bandung Institute of Technology. As you mentioned that quite many cases how we deal with the improvement of Adat recognition, their right is through, for example, grassroots movements or community-based programs, or there are some government efforts, as Bu Suraya mentioned, but it's rather from ad hoc temporary governmental agency, which is, to me, the question is to which extent this rather bottom-up and temporary efforts has a chance to improve the long-term and sustainability of the Adat recognition. While, as you know, that Indonesian land administration system is very much centralized. Meanwhile, the Adat is very diversity. How can we put into a decentralized system? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, one more.
Oh, Nancy.
One more.
Nancy's got a hand up.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Nancy, please, go ahead. Got a microphone down here. There's one here.
Sorry. Thanks. I just wanted to say that I thought that Suraya's framework actually did speak a lot about other idioms that are possible to use, and I wonder if either Suraya would like to comment back on the Adat conversation here, or the others might want to comment on how these other idioms might come in and serve parallel purposes. I'm not saying I prefer one or the other of these various idioms, because I think there's a lot of problems that haven't been solved yet as far as property rights go, certainly in Adat areas, and it's always been a major problem that the only thing that was available to some people was this possibility, and I don't think that should just be thrown aside, but at the same time, it would be nice if there was a few other tools in the box.
Okay. Who would like to, maybe since Suraya hasn't had a chance yet, maybe Suraya first.
Thank you. Well, I also share critical assessment of this movement. But then actually, it has been debating internally between the civil society groups. So it's not that that we all not debating internally. Yeah, but of course you cannot understand this why this is emerged something like this without looking back what happened before, which is unrecognized people inside the state forest. And the only available tools during the no order is only Adat only on the Adat communities, because the other tools, which is the land for farmers, is recognized as pro-communist. So it's not available during the Suharto era. And this is why then all the actually claiming it's safe under the Masyarakat Hukum Adat. Yeah? So, but then after Reformasi, actually it's what is rhetoric in the national, not always actually what happened on the ground. And there's a lot of actually land conflict, and what you're saying is actually what happened on the ground. Now, with the next, what I'm actually mention is there is now another move to targeting at least 12.7 million hectares back to the local communities. And there's a lot of civil society groups actually don't care about whether it's Adat or not. So the care is like, well, okay, how in this village, whether 18,000 or 30,000, then you give rights to these people, despite of these people are Adat or not. And this is kind of movement that it's more, in my opinion, is more excited, because then you push the Minister of Forest to recognize whatever people there, whether there's Adat or not, and that is kind of movement that beginning to emerge. It's still embryo. What I mean embryo, because the coalition itself is still debating. It's still, not cohesive itself. But these are the coming that can be potentially talk about recognition of people, despite whether it's Adat or not. So you can, okay, in certain circumstances, I think that should be Adat. I mean, like for people that Chip mentioned, which is tribal communities, which is a lot in Plaza Play. But in terms of number, that are actually small number compared to the other communities that should be recognized of rights of this land. So I think, in the end, I begin to believe now that if you go down to the recognition itself, then the debates, it will be, doesn't matter, that you Adat or not, yeah? Unless, pushing more on the, right of every village inside or surrounding the state forest area should have land rights. So that is next probably update.
Thanks. Just to clarify, just to make sure there's no confusion, there are many Aman members from Islamic communities, Muslims. In fact, the Secretary General of Aman is Muslim. In this case, we do have a specific, we've had a conversation about what's going on in that area. To Lieber's point from a friend from Leiden, it's absolutely true. This process is very district level dependent at this point. This is a bottom-up process that is a bottom-up process because we lack a national framework for recognition, awarding of, and fixing of rights through a tenure instrument and the protection of those rights against third-party incursion, particularly plantations. I'd say it's common in everywhere I've studied and worked that when you have a friendly local government, things happen. And when you have an unfriendly local government, things don't happen. And so the bureaucracy will always get in the way if it wants to. And one of the most advanced tenure instruments in the forest zone in Indonesia, the social forestry instruments, hutan kemasyarakatan and hutan desa, community forestry and village forests. Very well developed. and very poorly implemented. No political will within the Department of Forestry before to implement these. So we're talking about a couple thousand, 3,000, 100,000 hectares over the entire country versus what we see with plantations and logging companies. So for this point in time to actually have a system where you have a friendly Bupati that is committed to this, and a DPRD, local legislature, that is committed to this, to fix this into local law, which is a very strong legal basis, is important. And where those districts, kabupatens, are identified. Jayapura may be the best at this point, full on commitment from the Bupati and the local legislature, and the maps are all ready, and the instrument at the national level through the Home Affairs Decree 52 and the Agrarian Affairs Decree 9 provides the framework for recognition. So the key is, at this point in time, is to get it done on the ground. So the next year, when this meeting happens, we'll point to these experiences and talk about how these questions have played out on the ground. I'll leave it at that, I think.
Okay. Thanks to our three speakers for a very interesting session.